we're at the end of this arc now, but unlike before, I can't just wrap everything up into a nice, perfectly tidied up state and refined and polished and put it on the shelf and be done with it. I have a couple of issues. One is that I have a bunch of to-dos that are sort of all over the place that I haven't actually finished yet. I have some ideas that I wanted to explore that I don't want to forget about, that I haven't explored yet. And there are also rough spots in the code, things that I never wrote down a to-do for, but that were just a little bit awkward while I was dealing with them. So if I had kept going, I think the next step might have been some more API refinements and experiments on other ways to organize things like the rate information and the buffer information. Maybe do something about the idea of scales, and I have all these times 12s and times 10s everywhere. I've got little problems here and there that show incompleteness of the refinement and development of these setup ideas. But I'm kind of saying that I need to wrap it up anyways, and I'll do these things in the future on another pass over this system. So in order to facilitate that, what I'm doing is I'm kind of taking all of that information about what would be next if I kept going, and I'm condensing it and coupling it into that code. So I like to use a notebook, and I have a lot of my to-dos in the notebook over time, but that's very useful in the short run, and it sort of falls apart. It doesn't work super well over long-term to-dos because you end up forgetting about things. You have to flip back and forth over long distances of the notebook, and it isn't categorized and sort of indexed in the way that would be useful. So when I'm coming to the end of this arc, what I want to do is get all the information that's in my notebook, get all the information that's sort of spread out through the code, and get some of the information that's still in my head all into one place so that it will be coupled with the code properly, and anyone, including myself and other people who might be looking at this code in the future, will know where there are flaws that needed more work before they assume they can just build on top of it. Or if they are trying to pick it up and keep making progress, they will have some ideas of where next directions to go might be that are likely to give progress. Because, I'm trusting a little bit that my gut about what to do next would be useful, and I don't want to have to restart from scratch and play around and redevelop the gut feelings that I currently have. So I'm kind of trying to capture all of that and put it in the comments of this code somehow. Like with other cleanups, something I need to do here is sort of take the code I've got, make sure it's been properly organized so that the code that I want to keep is in the right files, the naming scheme is consistent, any weird obvious flaws that I can fix in a quick change here can be applied. But it's a little bit more difficult because when I go to the part where I tear down the scaffolding, there's sort of a gray zone between code that is worth keeping and code that is scaffolding that should go away because it isn't really refined or useful code. It was just sort of there for testing. And that gray zone is stuff that sort of started to get some development, and there might be one or two ideas in there, but it didn't go far enough. It didn't get enough development to really click together. And so I have to start making judgment calls that are about trading off, on the one hand, keeping code that has some useful ideas in it and might be useful to rely on in the future, and removing code, on the other hand, that could slow me down or complicate refactors in the future or be confusing to someone who's trying to use it. So I want to sort of be critical about, if I keep some code, could this confuse someone? Could it cause issues? Because it's my theory that it totally could. Even if it's slightly useful in a certain narrow case, it might be that by its name or by the way it appears to work, it gets assumed later on that it works a certain way when it doesn't, and so it causes all this waste of time. And it might just be better if I had deleted the code, if it's kind of in that rough gray zone area. But at the same time, some of this stuff is far enough along in the gray zone where it would be better to keep it, and you put some notes in about, hey, this isn't ready yet, it needs refinement in this and that area. So I'm kind of going through and making judgment calls about what's far enough along to keep, what notes need to be made so that it can be developed more, and what things aren't valuable enough to keep right now. And it's tough because there's a lot of code, but that's the other main thing I need to do during this cleanup. And it's not going to be perfect, but the idea is just try to put some amount of structure into the state we leave this code in so that when we come back to it later, it isn't totally confusing and impossible to recall what we were thinking in the last moments here at the end of the arc. The first part of this arc, the base layer for writing and reading WAV files, felt very solid. I think that sort of problem is a little closer to the computational end and farther from the sort of audio signal processing end of the spectrum on the problem space we explored. All this later stuff for audio generation, doing waves and wave shapes and mixing them together, compressors, filters, pitch controls, all of this kind of stuff that we've done in the later part has been a lot more in the music theory area, where I'm learning more as I'm going and not super, like, it's not entirely inside of my wheelhouse. So it stretches me a little bit, and I don't think that those things are entirely settled or as good as they could be. And I think that it's in a fairly good state for us to make more progress on it, but it's going to require an environment with richer tools and a better context for what the generated audio is actually going to be used for. So where it is right now, we just don't have enough constraints from the real use cases to guide what we learn next and where we refine APIs and things like that. So I think that leaving it in this current state is probably a good idea. There's a lot of notes in there now. I'm pretty comfortable with leaving it with all those ideas about where things could be going next, and we'll see how those notes meet up with where we're at the next time we visit this part of the code. I've noticed in the last half this arc that there's a lot of things cropping up now where the base layer is either missing a feature like the pseudo-random number generator, or there are little things that are annoying about using the code in exactly the way certain things are phrased. Especially in the debugger, I've hit a couple of annoying things. And I've also had a couple of notes from viewers of the previous videos who have pointed out little issues or bugs that I want to go back and fix. So all of that together means that I want to have a chance to do some cleanup before I do another arc on new stuff. And I also was thinking I definitely want to have a build system in place. And by build system, I mean specifically something that'll let me pretty easily manage building on the multiple compilers, because I'm trying to build for Clang and CL on Windows, managing options for all of those, having a debug and release mode, and having multiple build targets like my main where I do testing, and then that little helper I made for playing sounds, which turned out to be super helpful. So in order to accommodate the fact that I have this sort of growing combination of things that's leading to a lot of different ways I'm doing builds, I think that it's time to put in a slightly stronger system for breaking that problem down so I can maintain all of my different build combinations more easily. So that's what I think I'll be doing in the next arc. See you guys then.